Welcome, everybody. All right, today we are talking about transactional communication, and this is really a really good technique on how to break walls down. Now, if you could really think about it, there was a book written by Eric Berne back in 1970s, called early 70s. It was called "I'm Okay, You're Okay." But that book actually humanizes this theory to a place where people can use this in their daily lives and function much, much better than they usually do in their communication. What's really important for you to understand is that Eric Berne comes from three different positions. One is the adult, one is the parent, one's the adult, and one's the child, which goes all the way back to Sigmund Freud's theories. But what he's basically trying to do is understand that if I'm going to communicate in a position that I'm okay and you're not okay, we're probably going to have a really negative transaction because you're not going to like the way I'm talking to you. It doesn't matter what I'm saying. It's the fact that I'm determining that you're not okay in the communication style that's going to cause a big problem. And vice versa. If, okay, you're not okay, or excuse me, you think you're okay, but you're not, and I'm okay, that's another problem. And so, you could be talking like, okay, you think you're just perfect. You think you're just the greatest thing on the earth. Okay, fine. And I'm just chopped liver over here. Okay, you see, that's not a very good place to come from, too, because both of them have a parent-child dynamic. What we want to have is something very simple, adult to adult communication. Now, adult to adult is very simple. It doesn't take a lot of drama, it doesn't take a lot of context, it doesn't take a lot of verbosity, it doesn't take a lot of vocal tone, it doesn't take a lot of body language and strangeness. What it really is just simply using your words. And when you use your words, you have a better shot at communicating. The problem is people love to be interpreted. And by the way you're interpreted is going to be what determine how much of what you say is going to be heard. A lot of people don't realize that people often fight over the contextual part of their dialogue rather than the content. So, for instance, if you could be upset over, hey, you didn't clean the house and I had to clean the house. I can't believe you didn't clean the house. You told me you were going to do it. You lied to me, blah, 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 blah. Well, the truth is, you didn't clean the house. But second of all, what's going to be offended by the other person receiving it, the one that didn't clean the house, is they're going to be like, well, basically, how dare you talk to me like that? You they're not going to take any context with the words. The words are factual. What they're going to have a problem with is how you present. People in marriage, most of the time, fight not over content, but context. They don't like how they talk to each other because over the years they build up resentments and they treat each other like crap. And if you're going to talk to each other through those filters, you're going to have a real big problem. And if you do that in life, like most narcissists do, you're going to have a big problem. Transactional communication is huge. So here's what the definition looks like. Transactional analysis, TA. It's a psychological theory and a therapy method that examines how people exchange messages, and it helps to improve communication in relationships. Eric Berne was a psychiatrist back in the 50s, and he designed transactional analysis to be a practical, easy to understand alternative to traditional psychoanalysis, which was what Sigmund Freud originated back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, on into the 30s. So, what it basically breaks down is three modes of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And that means that you think, feel, and behave like a parent, you think, feel, and behave like an adult, and you think, feel, and behave like a child. And how you communicate from those positions dictates how we interact with other people in any conversation. Communication exchanges are classified into complementary, which means you're receiving it, crossed, which means I don't like the way you're talking to me, so I'm going to get you back by talking to you the same way you talk to me. Ulterior transactions, which means, oh, you're so smart and I'm not. Each affecting how smoothly and effectively a conversation flows. Now, he brought up a term And this is a therapy term, and you don't need to really know much about this from a personal perspective, but from a psychological perspective, it emphasizes the human need for recognition called strokes, which can be positive and negative, verbal or nonverbal, and influence your self-esteem and relationships. Also, life scripts is another term, and it explores the unconscious life plans formed in childhood that influence your adult choices. And it helps identify and change patterns that limit growth. And it's also used in therapy, education, business, everyday life to increase self-awareness, resolve conflicts, and create healthier patterns of interactions. So, what we want to think about is when we are a child, oftentimes we are harmed. So, for instance, if you lost a parent at a very young age, traumatically, very quickly, what would happen is there's a good chance you're going to feel a very hard hurt through your childhood that you have lost the permanent object of your life, the very important person in your life that made you feel safe to face the world. And if you lost that person, there's a very good chance that you are going to presume that you're going to lose all relationships that are permanent in your life, and you better prepare for that. And so what happens is the person becomes a double-edged sword. They drive away the people they get close to, and then they pull them towards them. They drive them away and pull them close. And they do that push-pull affect because they don't trust that a permanent relationship will be sustained because of the trauma that they experience at a young age. So what transactional analysis tries to do is say, well, a red flag of this hurt is probably coming from the way you communicate to your spouse. So let's say you communicate as a parent to a child. So if you're going to treat your spouse like a child, there's a really good chance that person's going to resent you for the rest of your life. If you're going to treat them as if you're a child and they're a parent, you make all the decisions, you do everything. I'm just a kid. I'm just along for the ride. I'm just somebody that doesn't make decisions. So if you act like a child and you force the other person to treat you like a child because you're indecisive and a weasel, then what's really going to happen is you're going to get a lot of parent-child communication from that other spouse who resents the fact that you put them in a parental position in the first place because you're both supposed to be decisive adults. Eric Berne was Canadian. He trained in psychoanalysis, and he did this in the late 50s. And psychoanalysis was very popular back in the 50s. It was influenced by Sigmund Freud, who viewed that childhood experiences shape adult personality and emotional well-being. And he built that on the idea to create a model that was more practical and accessible to people so they could heal quickly. And he believed that the way we were parented definitely and directly influences the development of your ego states, of your parent, of your adult, of your child, which are formed through transactional analysis and come to the conscious level rather than the subconscious level. So, what he's basically trying to do is understand what position we communicate from. And by doing that, asking ourselves, am I getting the results that I want based on the way that I'm communicating to other people? Many times, if you're the most decisive child, let's say the oldest child, and you're always telling your siblings what to do, there's a good chance that when you get married, you're going to marry somebody who has codependent tendencies, and you're going to be ordering them around because they don't like conflict. And they're always the child, and you're always the adult, and you're always picking on them and finding things to control and finding things to criticize because that's what you think you're supposed to do in this life because that's what you did as a child. Well, that sucks. And if you don't get conscious about the way you communicate, you're never going to change your relationships with the people who are supposed to stay there because there's only so long a person can be treated like a child. Many dysfunctional behaviors stem from self-limiting decisions made in childhood as survival strategies. For instance, the narcissist. The narcissist forms their personality at a very young age because they're neglected. So the neglect means that the adult brain has to form in their childhood life. So let's say they're 9, 10, 11 years old. Suddenly they're out buying their own food. They're trying to make money. They're trying to get their own grades because nobody cares about their grades. They have to do their own homework. They have to do all their chores. Even if they don't think they have to make up their own rules. They have to survive on their own. They have no net because they have worthless breeding stock parents, which many people do. 50% of our population are breeding stock parents. So, the bottom line is the kid goes out in the world and has to make their way. If that's going to be the case, what's going to happen is that adult brain forms 9, 10, 11 years old, and they go into their adult life with the maturity of a 9, 10, 11-year-old brain, thinking that it knows everything about life because it already had to make decisions that adults were making at such a young age. And so a lot of adults love these young people, 9, 10, 11, and give them a lot of positive reinforcement because they don't have to ask them twice about a whole lot of things because they do them well because they take accountability at a young age. Unfortunately, as adults, they think they know more than everybody. They think they're better than everybody, and they operate as such, and everybody becomes a tool to be used rather than a human being. And so, unfortunately, they lose their empathy for others because they, as a child, had to use people to get their needs met. The goal of transactional analysis and therapy is to help people rewrite their life scripts, replace destructive, limiting patterns with healthier, more cooperative behaviors. And over time, there's other psychologists such as Thomas Harris and Claude Steiner that expanded on transactional analysis and its applications. So let's dive deeper into what Eric Berne created: ego states. In transactional analysis, the ego states are three distinct ways we think, feel, and behave. The parent holds the rules, the values, the attitudes we learn from authority figures. The adult is our rational, problem-solving self that focuses on the present. The child carries our emotions and creativity, early coping patterns from childhood. And in daily life, we switch between these states, sometimes within the same conversation. And by understanding these ego states and their subcategories, you can identify unhelpful patterns in yourself and others, shift towards more productive communication styles, and balance structure, empathy, logic, and creativity in your relationships. So, what is this parent ego state? Well, it contains beliefs and attitudes and behaviors that we absorbed from authority figures during our formative years. So if you grew up in an authoritarian house where your mother or father ordered you around, gave you no choices, and you had to do whatever that they ordered you to do, and if you didn't, the punishment would be you would lose the greatest thing in your life for an entire month, that is probably what you're going to do as a parent. Now, do we do that as a parent? No, we probably make a promise and say, I don't ever want to do that to my children. I would never do that. But the deal is that oftentimes that's what we resort to because it worked. And so sadly, whatever works, whatever parenting style worked, and we determine, hey, that worked or that didn't, we tend to absorb that because we like the path of least resistance. We are lazy. We do not do a lot of original thinking. So parents and teachers and relatives and other influential adults have a great influence on how we operate. And it's like an internal voice that plays back instructions and rules and moral codes from childhood. And that goes into what Freud would call your subconscious mind. Critical controlling parents. This side enforces boundaries, often evaluates and corrects others. It can be protective and ensure order, but it also comes from harsh, judgmental, or authoritarianism. So if you've got a spouse that's like that, there's a good chance that there were people around them that were like that also, that were very harsh. So those people tend to tell you what you do wrong all day long. Do they do positive reinforcement? Maybe every once in a while if there's somebody they really, really love. But if it's their spouse, there's a good chance they tear them apart because they're controlling jerks. Because that's what they learn to be, controlling jerks. So people that order people around have a problem. They need to control everything because they don't like chaos in their environment. They don't like surprises. They don't like to be caught off guard. They don't like change. They don't like life in general. If you dropped them in the middle of a jungle, however, there's a good chance they'd be the first one to be dead because they'd want to make rules about the jungle, even to the tiger that's about to kill them. So the deal is that these personalities may be adaptive to a certain household at a certain time, but they're not adaptive in life. And that is what transactional analysis tries to take away and understand that we have to neutralize our communication into transactions. Then there's this nurturing parent. This side offers care, comfort, encouragement, provides emotional support and protection. But if overused, it rescues others unnecessarily, discouraging independence. So this person is like over empathetic. If I give you something, then you will accept me. These kind of people have a personality that they have to do something for people to love them because they don't believe them as an individual are worthy of love because their parents wonderfully created that human being. That you have to do something for me to love you. And once again, that's because 50% of our population are breeding stock. Therefore, as far as parents are concerned, they breed, they have their little offspring that they could say is all theirs, and they can feel like the god of the universe because they pooped out this kid or created this kid with someone else. And guess what? That's all it is to them because after that, everything's about that parent rather than the child. Managers, oftentimes you can hear problems in how they communicate. You must submit this report by 5 p.m. or a teacher saying after school to help student prepare for an exam is a nurturing parent or a parent telling their child, always wear a coat outside, you'll catch cold, demonstrates a blend of nurturing concern and controlling instruction. So some people are controlling and nurturing at the same time. They want the best for their kid, they want them to be careful, blah, 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 but they're overcompensating. And that's another thing that we have to learn about ourselves, that we overcompensate in our communication because we are control freaks by nature. This is the funny thing about control. All Axis 1 diagnoses are those are diagnoses in which a human being develops like depression or anxiety or OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, things like that. What happens is those symptoms are what we come up with as a human being to control things we cannot control. That's our way of coping. And then it turns into a diagnosis and a way of life, and sometimes it becomes your personality. So, what is a strength of transactional analysis? Well, it provides structure and order. The parent, what and the parent state does that also. It helps clear up rules and expectations. We can make things like classrooms and workplaces and families more predictable and manageable. So there's positives to the parenting. Also, it promotes safety and protection. So it's not always a bad thing to be a parent because it passes on values and warnings and protective behaviors. It prevents harm and guides others towards wise decisions. It also encourages responsibility because it instills discipline, a strong work ethic, moral standards that help people function effectively in our society. These are all very important things to human development. So the parent is not a bad thing always, but what it is, it's a necessary thing, but it needs to learn, we have to learn when to use it and when not to use it, because some people get off on living in one of these states of a parent, adult, or child. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come right back and talk more about how transactional analysis can help you. Come Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about transactional analysis, which is Eric Berne's theory from back in the 50s, translated into a book called I'm Okay, You're Okay in the 1970s. Now, we're talking about the parenting state, the parental state. That state has also the risk of oppression. So, we talked about the positives in the last segment. Here's the negatives. Oppression through over control. Critical parent dominates. It creates a stifling environment where others feel micromanaged, unfairly judged, and often triggers resistance, resentment, and passive aggressive behavior. If you've ever worked for a micromanager boss, that is an example of oppression. Oppression sucks. It's amazing that people walk through life thinking that they can treat other people like that. They can treat their children, their spouse like that. That they can sit around and tell people what to do because everybody else is stupid and you're not. What an obvious narcissist. It's sickening. But people do it because they're insecure. And what it's really demonstrating is what a weak, insecure human being they are because they must tell everybody how they're wrong and believe that they are just fine as they are. Then there's the potential fostering of dependency. So if you get some codependent people, they love these kind of people, so they'll suck up to these turds and what they do is they'll do everything that's prescribed to them. But nonetheless, every time they do what's prescribed to them, that person's going to find out a million things they did wrong because you didn't follow my instructions exactly like I told you to do. Blah, 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 blah. These people, they're never ending, never please them. And it's sick because this comes out of their childhood. Something in their life told them that they would have to make rules about everything in their life and nothing would ever satisfy them. That perfectionistic strategy is sickening because life is not perfect. The only thing perfect in this life is God. That's it. You're not. You don't make the rules. And sitting around trying to make everything perfect in your life in dealing with human beings and human being interactings has no soul, has no dignity, has no feelings. It is sickening because it makes you always looking good for yourself and everybody hating you. So the deal is that also outdated, unhelpful beliefs. Oftentimes, these people repeat messages they learned in their childhood. You know, you have to brush your teeth right now before dinner or after dinner. You have to do this, you have to do that, you have to, whatever. They will come from, you have to take a bath or you can't, don't put your head in a plastic bag or what. Yes, there's a lot of common sense decisions that are great that you learn in your childhood, but there's some things that are just ridiculous. And what we have to understand is we gotta pass on some of those behaviors because some of them have no logic whatsoever. Prejudices about different kinds of cultures, rule or different kinds of people, or different genders, rigid rules, behaviors that are no longer the present situation. And what happens is often, our society has moved on. And what we have to understand is moving on may not be a good thing because oftentimes we impulsively jerk over into stupid things like the liberals have done and the Democrats and the anarchists that are running our world at this point and trying to destroy everything that's good. But they're going to go run down their path and everybody else is bad in their mind. Well, they will self-destruct eventually because common sense always weighs out. There's also this adult ego state. Now, what is that? So, parent, adult, child. Adult is the ego state that is calm, is clear thinking. It deals with the world as it is right now. It listens, it gathers facts, it weighs options, and makes balanced decisions. This is a responsive part of your human spirit, which is very faith-based, meaning that I don't care what the situation is. I figure I will handle it. I may not handle it perfect. I may not do everything exact, but I will handle it. It will be okay. Just because you are calling me names or saying terrible things about me doesn't mean I have to react to you. That could be your problem, not my problem. I'm glad to hear criticism. I'm happy to hear things, but if you're going to make an ass of yourself about it and you're going to say, overstate your point, and you're going to do it in front of lots of people, there's a real good chance I don't need to listen to that at this time. It's not helpful. It's part of us that can step back from emotional reactions, see the bigger picture, and choose the most constructive way forward. And sometimes that calls for a timeout and a time back. Don't ever call a timeout without a time back. That's a very important ingredient of transactional analysis because everything you want to come back to your adult. Your adult is your best functioning part of yourself. This is the part that you want to concretely teach your children, and you want to concretely teach yourself to stay in your adult because your adult is rational. Your adult is not reactive. Your adult is not going to make impulsive decisions, but it also weighs decisions and it can also move forward. Your child also could propel you forward, which is great, but the deal is sometimes it does it impulsively. You always want your adult state to be well matured so that it keeps you measured. This state is more open, more rational, less quick to make harsh judgments on a situation or a person. When a communication occurs in the adult state, we're more likely to be respectful, make compromises, listen fully to other people, and have more healthy social interactions. It functions as a single rational mode. When a colleague misses a deadline, the adult might say the deadline was yesterday. What happened? How can you fix it? They don't make a big production over it. Deciding between two job offers by comparing salaries, benefits, and career opportunities is an adult approach. Planning a family trip by checking weather forecast, budget, and everyone's schedules is another example. Because adults are good planners. Adults take into consideration a much wider swath of impact of their decision on other people. So the strength is it promotes rational decision making, which is very safe. It encourages fair and balanced communication, like discussions focused on facts rather than emotional biases. Your emotions are what cause all conflict. You have to understand that your emotions are your meaning. Your content is your content, but the emotions behind it are what we use to communicate. So you have to be really careful what and how you communicate to get your message across. It also resolves conflict constructively. It can mediate between emotional needs and practical realities and foster understanding between delivering different ego states. So, what's also important is you don't want to be a robot. There's a lot of people that just stick to logic because logic is safe. Well, I'm sorry, but if you're going to get married, that's an emotional state. Transactional analysis is not about ignoring emotions, it's about honoring them. I understand you feel that way. I can see how you look at me like that. Oh, that's an interesting way to see that. Oh, I understand how you can be so disappointed in that. You sound like you're very frustrated. You sound like you're very whatever. You see, what's important is to acknowledge emotions because that is the first thing that we have to acknowledge in any kinds of transaction. The emotion is the meaning. We acknowledge it, we understand it. You don't have to defend against it. You don't have to get offended by it. You receive it. And by receiving it, what happens is now we can talk about the content. So we have a way to get through a transaction into the content where we can compromise and make decisions. The other thing is the emotional detachment is a distractor and a drawback for the adult self because it can minimize people's emotion and tone in a situation. I'm not saying ignore a person's context. What I'm saying is honor their context, understand their context. That's called intelligence and wisdom, and then deal with the content. Also, potential underuse of high emotions. In heated moments, people may slip into parent or child modes instead of staying in their adult state. That's what it is to be human. And to understand that we're not robots, we have to understand emotion because emotion is what we use to have meaning, and meaning is what we use to operate in our life. What's very important to understand is, disciplining a child, let's say, may mean one thing to one parent. Oh my gosh, I don't want them to have a bad relationship with us. And to the other, it's this kid's got to learn how to do this thing. Two different meanings. And so one's arguing to not abuse the child, and the other's arguing we have to teach the child. Now we can come, since we understand each other's meaning, now we can come to a conclusion we can both tolerate. There's this child ego state. So parent, adult, child. Now we're talking about the child. That state is part of us that carries the emotions, curiosity, imagination we had as children. It's where our playful energy, our creativity, our natural impulses live. It also holds the fears, the defenses, the habits we developed to cope with rules, authority, and the need for approval when we were young. And it's shaped by emotions in early life. The raw joy, wonder, fear, anger, excitement you experience before learning to filter or hide them. What's really interesting is many of the youngest children and families are have a very strong ego state of child because their parents were too tired to parent them. They just didn't care. They were like, "Oh my God, there they go again. I don't have the energy to deal with that." And so what would happen is the kid had the freedom to experience their childhood. They had the experience to be free, but they also had the experience to have experienced parents who made them safe relatively. So what we have to understand is that child state is your playful self. That's part of your genuine self. You don't want to ignore it. You don't want to ignore the parent part of yourself. You don't want to ignore the adult, and you don't want to ignore the child. You want to get to know all three because you can use them all healthfully in your communication. Your mental health will be determined based on how you handle your parent, your adult, and child, and how you use them in communication. Playing creatively, pretend play exploration sparks curiosity and self-expression. Coping habits like how you soothed yourself, how you sought comfort, how you adapted to keep yourself safe when situations were overwhelming. These are very important things that we carry from our childhood. You'd have to decide what is going to be healthy about coping from your inner child in your adult life. There's also conditioning through experiences, repeated outcomes in childhood, being comforted, ignored, rewarded, or punished, shaped how you learn and respond emotionally and behaviorally. So there's a real good chance that whenever you were harshly punished for something in your childhood, let's say showing up late, you may rebel against your spouse showing up when you show up late for them because when you were younger, you got punished showing up late. And so now you show up late just to rebel against them because you want to show that you have the power now to show up late when you didn't before as a child. This is kind of complicated, but that's kind of how the inner child works. Then there's the adapted child, and that adjusts behavior, pleasing others, avoid negative consequences. So what we're talking about is the passive aggressive person. The passive aggressive person may have a very malformed child because they did not like conflict, they did not like consequences when they were younger. So what they do is they stuff everything. I don't like how you're talking to me. I don't like what you're saying to me. And it's the same thing over and over. And every day, the same things get said, the same negative comments. And then eventually, what happens over time, like a teapot, they heat up and they boil. And once they hit the boiling point, that's when they blow. And when they blow, it's a collection of resentments that they've formed over the same thing over a long period of time, but it blows up as one big explosion, and the person receiving it thinks that person needs therapy and they've just lost their mind and I don't feel safe with you, and they start spouting crap like that. Because the person is passive aggressive as a child, what they did was they stuffed their feelings because their abusive, nasty parents. They did not want to share communication that would cause bigger problems. But eventually, if they're married, they're going to be talk negatively to over and over and over again. Eventually, they're going to blow and scare the hell out of their spouse. There's other things that where the inner child is messed up. Laughing uncontrollably at funny jokes comes from a free child. That can be a good thing. Sulking after being criticized, refusing to follow instructions as an act of defiance is the adapted child in a rebellious state. Dancing freely in the living room just because you feel happy is a free child expression. So, that spontaneity is great, encourages authenticity, which is a wonderful thing, adds warmth, encourages, having a good relationship with yourself, but sometimes it can be very destructive. Sometimes it can be taken as you're making fun of me. Sometimes it can be oversensitivity to criticism, and that could be a malformed inner child where I don't like how you're talking. You're always mean to me. You're this, you're that. You see, this can be a malformed child. You have to learn to parent your own inner child. That is what transactional analysis also encompasses. They're basic units of communication. One person sends a message, a transactional stimulus, the other replies, a transactional response. Each message comes from one of three ego states, the parent, adult, or child. The transactions are complementary, matching, hopefully adult to adult, crossed, mismatched, parent to child, ulterior, containing hidden messages. Now, here's the bad one, go from a negative to a negative. Well, you're a really crappy person. Well, so are you. You did this. Well, so did you. You did this. That's you. I'm not okay. You're not okay. Boy, is that toxic. Complementary transactions happens when the reply comes from the exact ego state the first person was expecting. So the conversation flows smoothly without any confusion or clash. Unfortunately, what you want is oftentimes the receiver goes to either parent or child because they don't like what you've said or how you've said it. People that can't take criticism will go from parent to child. They don't stay in their adult because they're not safe there. They feel attacked by everything. And people that interpret everything will go to parent and child and not stay in their adult. So when someone says, "Oh, I'm just a sensitive person," or "I am an empath," what they're really telling you is they like to be in their parent and they like to be in their child, but they don't like to be in their adult because they haven't formed that adult very solidly. Complementary transactions happens from adult to adult state. It's thought to be the best type of communication. It's respectful, it reduces conflicts. If you ask from adult state, what time does the meeting start? And the other person answers from their adult state, it starts at 2. That's complementary. you know? Or what if you ask the same question? What time does the meeting start? Well, I told you that 5 times. Why didn't you get my email? Blah, 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 blah. That's the parent idiot that has to respond to you. And that's disrespectful, but they don't care. They still want to barf all over you. Those people have problems. You need to understand that when you're having bad transactions, it's an indicator that somebody is in a bad state of mind. You don't have to respond to it. What you want to do is stay in your adult, stay flat and straight. If you think about all the lines you listen to and remember from movies, there's a real good chance that most of those lines were delivered flat and straight. That's because they gave you nothing but the words to focus on. You know, it's important to note that complementary describes the structure of an exchange. You know, someone says, let's say from a child state, I'm really worried about my test. And then you come back as the nurturing parent. Well, you'll do great. You've studied hard. It's important to note that complementary describes the structure of the exchange once again. So a critical parent is met by an adapted child. Apology is still complimentary because it follows the expected pattern, even if it's unhelpful. Complementary transactions keep conversation moving. Their quality depends on the ego states involved. That's a very important thing. You need to know what ego states you operate from. Adult to adult complementary transactions are considered the healthiest because they're respectful, balanced, and based on the present situation rather than the past conditioning. You can also have parent to parent communication. Oh, you know, I told my husband that he needed to do that, and he blah, 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 and he did that, and it worked out for him. Well, I told my husband that, da, 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 or I told my wife that we were going to do blah, blah, blah. Yeah, my wife did that too, and I told her blah, 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 blah. That's a parent to parent, where they're bragging about their ability to parent. It's kind of sick, but that's what people do. Cross transactions occur when sender's message is aimed at one ego state, but the receiver replies from a different one. In other words, the communication lines don't match. That's where things get out of balance. That's what transactional communication comes in to try to help you with your mismatched tensions that happen in mismatched communications from parent to adult to a child. All right, we're going to take a break and we're going to come right back. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about transactional analysis. Eric Berne, 1950s. This is such a critical model to help people in understanding how they communicate and how to help each other out. You know, if you're going to speak, for instance, in a critical parent tone where you're belittling, assuming mistakes are intentional, threatening to, do something because, you're not doing what I tell you to do. Their goal is to pull you into a child position, which is apologetic, submissive, and reinforcing their authority. When you're around people like that, it's really sickening and out of balance. However, there's a lot of people that get off on that feeling of being able to be belittling and authoritative and restrictive. They have a toxic nature. And you have to understand that there is a lot of people in marriage that are like that, and you're probably married to one of them, or you may be the one that somebody else is a poor victim of. But the deal is that, adult states are not parent states. Adult states are calm, factual, focused on solving the problem, and we are not trying, it's not a place where you're trying to hurt someone. It's where you're trying to correct a situation. What you have to understand with conflict, especially in marriage, is all conflict is meant to make the relationship better. Once again, for those of you who are conflict avoidant and those of you that are high conflict, all conflict is meant to make the situation better. If I'm in marital therapy with other people and I'm treating a couple and they're calling each other names, I'm happy. Why? Because they care. When I'm in trouble in marital therapy is when they are at apathy. That means they don't care and they think they're right and they're stuck in their position and they'll never come out. So then we have to go to the consequences of their behavior rather than talking to them about their behavior. So a cross transaction is when we have, for instance, a critical parent wanting a submissive child to hear them. It holds that responding in the adult state can help guide the other person back to their adult state. That is the goal of living in your adult state, in your communication, being transactional. I don't like it when you behave like that. It would have been really helpful if you would have washed the dishes today because I had to do that and I didn't have the time. I had this meeting and that meeting. You know, I would really prefer that we talked about this tonight because I don't like the result of what is happening right now. You're inviting someone to a conversation rather than a humongous Broadway performance. And if you can't get that out of, well, I don't have the time to do that. And if you didn't do this, then blah, 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 blah. That's the critical parent. Well, when you're ready to respect me, let's have a meeting. I say, maybe in a half hour, where we can treat each other respectfully and you could stop throwing garbage and we could actually have a conversation. So you can always invite somebody to the opportunity to communicate, and until they're willing to do that, don't communicate. Because there's no sense in communicating with an idiot, critical parent, or a person that needs to be a child. Arterial transactions occur when sender delivers two messages at the same time, overt and hidden. On the surface, the message appears to come from the adult and then suggesting something straightforward and rational, but beneath the surface, there's a subtle message coming from the sender of a parent or child state aimed at the receiver's corresponding parent or child. This means the transaction operates in two levels. The hidden message can be intentional or unconscious, but often has more influence on the receiver actually responding. For example, a teacher or a friend might say, "You can choose to study subjects that lead to becoming a doctor. However, it's very hard and requires a lot of intelligence. So, everybody has the right to be a doctor, but you might be too stupid to be that." That's the message. Really sucks, but a lot of people communicate that way. Underneath, the real intent might be the trigger to the listener's rebellious child, prompting them to think, "I'll prove I'm smart enough to do that. I'm going to work extra hard." Okay, so some people would respond to that and rebel against the turd that says that. A lot of people are very condescending. They think they know better. They think other people are stupid, and they communicate to people as if they are stupid. If you're going to communicate from the state of "I'm okay and you're a dummy," or "you could be smart like me, but you're not," you're probably not going to be heard well. In transactional analysis, a life script is an unconscious plan for living, an internal storyline created in childhood that guides a person's thoughts, emotions, behaviors well into their adult life. It's a powerful, invisible influence on how we live. It begins in childhood from a mix of external messages and internal decisions. It shapes much of our adult behavior until we consciously choose to rewrite it. There's a winner's script. "I can succeed and be happy." Child messages like encouraging and supportive. "You can do it. You're lovable." There's an adult pattern that seeks opportunities, preserves through challenges and healthy relationships. So a person who changes careers in midlife to follow their passion, trusting they can adapt and thrive. A non-winner script that can be developed at a young age. "I'll get by, but I won't aim too high because I'm not too smart." Don't take risks. Be satisfied with what you have. Be very careful and fear-based in every decision that you make so that you never, ever fail. It avoids challenges, chooses safe paths, settles for good enough rather than stretching your potential. So, someone who stays in a secure but unfulfilling job for decades to avoid uncertainty is a life full of fear. Well, life is faith-based, not fear-based. So, people that live in fear are idiots who live in a vacuum. And if you're going to do that, you're not going to ever experience much of life. You're going to manage life, but you're not going to live it. Life is faith-based. You take leaps of faith. You may go into a dangerous place. You may take a chance on doing something you've never done before. You may develop a relationship. You may get married. You may buy a car. You may buy a house. You may make an impulsive decision. You may decide to change and move houses. You may have more children. Whatever it is, that's what we are meant to do, live in faith. That means we make decisions and we adapt to our decisions and we learn from our decisions. But failure is not abject failure, it's just failure. It's meant to learn from. But many people with the non-winner strategy look at failure as abject failure every single time. There's a loser script. "Things never work out for me. I'll never amount to much. Why can't you be like your brother? Why can't you be like blah 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 blah?" And these self-sabotaging behaviors interpret setbacks as proof of inadequacy. Someone who consistently leaves projects unfinished, reinforcing belief they can't succeed. So that's a script they follow through their adult life, where they never finish what they start. They wait until they feel like it. That's called depression. There's always scripts, rigid rules. I must never, always be polite, never cry, always finish when you start. These are ridiculous. But people follow these patterns from their childhood because they learned from their breeding stock parents. You don't follow rules even when they no longer serve them, leading to stress and missed opportunities. They turn down a green opportunity because you don't quite, quit what you started. Oh, I can't quit. It's like, oh, I'm gonna keep my parents' business open and never open my own business, which I know would make tons of money. But since my parents love this business so much, I'm just gonna stay in it and run it for them. Ridiculous. Then there's a hero martyr script. I must sacrifice myself for others, put others first. Don't be selfish. Well, you're inviting yourself to marry a narcissist when you do that. Overgivers neglect their own needs. They don't know what self-love is. Self-love is learning how to say no to things that hurt you, which is called healthy. But a lot of people resist that because they don't understand it. It's very important that you understand that you have to fill your own tank before you can fill other people's tank. There's a thing, there's a difference between being arrogant and being confident. Arrogance is when you think you are better than other people because you know what you know. Confidence means, okay, I know I'm a good surgeon, but I'm probably really crappy at plumbing. That is an expert. That's a good thing. We can all be confident in certain skills that we work hard at. Hard is what makes your life easier. Until and after scripts. Well, I can be happy after this happens. You can relax after you've worked hard. No, you can find times to relax in between working hard. It may make you actually accomplish what you're trying to accomplish easier and better and more pleasurable. But we have all this, until I do this, then I won't do that. What that says is you do not trust yourself. If you don't have a trusting relationship with yourself because you don't finish what you start, because you promise things, you overpromise. If you're one of these people, you don't care about your integrity. You're going to be old and nobody's going to care about you because you lie. People that do that, people that are until this and then that. No, life is multidimensional, multitasking. You can do a lot of things at the same time, but it may not be you that gets them done. Maybe you have to hire other people to help you. These people that are control freak, well, I don't have the money to do this. Well, form a plan. Figure it out. Make the time, but don't sacrifice your family just so you can finish a room in your house. That's ridiculous. How many times do these scripts show up in your adult life? There's beliefs and attitudes and rules absorbed by parents and caregivers. We need to reevaluate, what am I parenting? What do I keep parroting from my childhood? What it keeps coming out of my mouth that I actually haven't really thought about? Because there's a lot of times that our parents program crap into our brains that don't serve us. You can't trust people. There's a lot of people that have trust issues. Well, no, guess what? You don't have to trust people, but it's good to trust people. What you will have to have is faith in people. I'm going to have faith in you. I don't trust you, but I'll have faith in you. Or guess what? You broke your trust with me. I'm going to have faith with you because you've asked me to, but I'm not going to trust you, and I don't know when I'll trust you. Trust is very hard to get. Faith is what we operate by, not trust. Trust is very hard. You need to operate out of faith with people even after they've broken your trust so that they can make their way back, so that you can keep your relationship with them. If you're one of these all or, well, now you broke my trust and now I can't trust you, so I'm going to have to treat you like crap for the rest of your life. You betrayed me. You did this, you did that. Well, great. What are you? The high pompous thing that never did anything wrong in your life? Well, guess what? All of us do stupid things. What we have to care about is redemption. Hey, I know I broke your trust. I know I did this thing that hurt you. I can't even explain my intentions because you don't want to hear them because they probably were good, but it's irrelevant. What I really care about is you have faith in me until you trust me. That would be the adult. That would be the person trying to establish that I want to do the right thing for you. I care about you. I really care that this hurts your feelings, and I want to make this work. Have faith in me. Trust me when you trust me. That's how we mend relationships. People are so all or nothing and negative. It's really hard to get through these defense mechanisms that people build up in their warped little childhoods and also their traumas. Injunctions, restrictive, unconscious messages. Don't fail, don't feel, don't be important, don't cry. That is ridiculous. To have these absolutes, we are very gray people. We don't live in black and white. Yes, you can feel. Yes, you can fail and fail and fail. It's what you do with it that's important. Be important. Be important, especially when it counts. These are things that we have to unscript in our life. And what happens is with transactional analysis is we communicate from the wrong parts of ourselves to other people and treat them like they're not okay. And we are okay. Or we treat ourselves like we're not okay and you're okay. We do stupid things that push other people away. We need to be careful how we communicate and the context that we communicate from. That's our show. I want to thank everybody for listening. I love hearing from you. You can do that on our webpage, voiceamericamedia.com and libsyn.com. Remember, the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it's taken place. Also, the most important thing is hearing what isn't said. Also, people hear your words, but they feel your attitude, and that's what's important. Thanks for